What are the Saints' plan at head coach now that Aaron Glenn is gone? Pecan, ladies and gentlemen, the backdrop, New Orleans football, Nick Underhill, Mike Triplett. They are home. It's another day, another snow day here. Well, Nick is home. Mike is in a parking garage or some kind of dungeon, I assume. But more snow here. The snow is finally starting to melt. It has been a magical time in New Orleans. I've been trying to put as many videos as I can on my Twitter and my Instagram to just show exactly how magical it is right now in New Orleans. One of my favorite videos of all time. So make sure you're following the social media to keep up with all of that. But today, it's not about the snow. It's about the head coaching search. So what exactly are the Saints' plan now that Aaron Glenn, who for most of the offseason, the idea was that Glenn was the number one guy. Glenn was the candidate that Loomis wanted and everybody wanted, and now this kind of collapsed on top of itself. So now we got to figure things out, right? I personally think it is a fatal four-way ladder match with the head coach of the New Orleans Saints briefcase hanging high above. The four entrants into the ladder match are Mike McCarthy. The jokes write themselves. Mike McCarthy, Joe Brady, Kellen Moore, Darren Rizzi. In my opinion, one of those four hombres will be the next head coach of the New Orleans Saints. Let's see what Mike and Nick think.
With Aaron Glenn off the board, going to New York, spent a day there yesterday, accepted the job today. What do you think the next move is for the Saints, the head coach?
Well, it's funny. I thought he was the leading candidate from the very beginning. The day Dennis Allen got fired, we posted a story minutes afterward with Aaron Glenn's picture on it and everything they do next there. So this does feel like a disappointment from that standpoint, but I don't think it feels like a surprise.
Yeah.
I think
so probably a week ago, maybe even longer now, we had a video on here where I said, like, look, I don't think Glenn's going to take the job. I think it sounds like he's going to go to the Jets. And it makes perfect sense. Like when you look at the whole thing and the infrastructure of why he went to the Jets and the reports that he wanted to be a package deal with Lance. Well, Lance, like the Jets have an opening at GM, so it all lines up perfectly. It makes total sense. So I think, and we talked about it, that the Jets are a better roster than the Saints. So especially defensively, he's a defensive coach. Like having Sauce Gardner and Quinn Williams and, so it all just adds up. Not surprising at all that he left. We all knew this was going to happen, but now it's officially official.
It was very clear that Aaron Glenn was going to be probably the number 3 candidate in this year's cycle behind Vrabel and Ben Johnson. They went 1 and 2. Aaron Glenn went 3. And we also, he could have picked the Jaguars. He could have picked the Jets. I think he was in the mix on, 4 or 5 of these jobs. And we all openly admitted the Saints don't have the most attractive job. Thought maybe Aaron Glenn's ties to the Saints would move them up in his mind. But he also had ties to the Jets, ties to the Cowboys, and ties to the Jaguars. 4 of the teams he played for were interested in him for their head coaching job. So, all in all, I think it's disappointing. You don't want to be the team that gets rejected by the guy that you kind of groomed to become a head coach that finished second the last time around. That you were.
But at the same time, maybe this was all fugazi from the beginning, because when Ben Johnson was being floated around, the idea was that Ben Johnson wanted to name his GM, which again everyone thought was going to be Lance Newmark, who spent a long time in Detroit, and so we kind of wrote off Ben Johnson immediately, like, well, the Saints are not going to do that. So if the snow stops, ladies and gentlemen, the sirens begin. It's been crazy. While the snow has gone on, New Orleans was. Not a siren was heard, nothing, absolutely nothing. Just straight up winter wonderland, people building snowmans and whatnot, and now we're back to normal business. But if Aaron Glenn from the jump would have been like, oh yeah, and he wants to name the GM, he would have never fit for the Saints. He would have never even been a candidate. So, part of me thinks like maybe we all kind of got this wrong on just how much of a candidate Aaron Glenn truly was. And all he did was a Zoom interview. It's not like he was in the building multiple times and all. He did one Zoom interview for an hour, and that was it. So, I think Glenn was like the low hanging fruit of who could be the next Saints head coach because he's a defensive guy. We just fired a defensive coach. He had ties here. Like all of it kind of lined up. But the more you look at it, the more it's like, it really wasn't a fit.
But none of this should be a surprise. I mean, we all know where the Saints stand in this thing. They've got to get either a second-tier candidate or somebody who really likes this opportunity in particular. And Aaron Glenn was a superstar on the rise who had his pick of 5 or 6 teams, and he picked the New York Jets. And he also got to handpick his GM that he gets to work with there. So I'd say disappointing, but I don't think it changes anything. I think all these other candidates that they've been interviewing are the guys they have to keep interviewing. I don't think it was, oh no, what do we do now? We thought we were going to get him.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that kind of really turned the tides to where when Ben Johnson took the job in Chicago and chose to work with Ryan Poles instead of going to the Raiders with Lance Newmark, like I think that just kind of that opened it up. Like he could have that total alignment he wanted with the Jets, and that was not simply going to exist with the Saints. The Saints have
Exactly. It was both of them being floated as okay. Lance is gone with one of the two, and ultimately Ben Johnson decided that going to Chicago, and he would be okay going by himself, and because of that, then all of a sudden it goes to, okay, well now Newmark is with Aaron Glenn. If Ben Johnson would have went to the Raiders with Newmark, I have a feeling Aaron Glenn may have gone to the Saints because then all of a sudden there is no GM along with the package. So so it's just one of those things where the dominoes kind of happened and they kind of fell, but it should not be a surprise if you've been tracking any of this.
Have a general manager and a front office in place, and he had the opportunity to go somewhere to work with a guy that he worked with in Detroit, a guy that he's probably sat around and dreamed up roster ideas with, and been talking about their future with forever, and that happened, and the door got shut. And look, it's not a good look for your team. Like, as we're sitting here looking at Jacksonville right now, and you see Liam Cohen, kind of tells them no. And, obviously it's a completely different thing. But when you look at some of these other teams and they aren't able to get the person that they're publicly courting, I think it's a tough look for you. And it's a reminder of, kind of where it's at right now overall. But, I don't think the Jets are, an overwhelming favorite over the Saints. Like, yeah, they got some cap space now, but they got their drawbacks too. You got Woody Johnson there, who obviously, there was that explosive story from the.
Yeah, the Jets have a way worse ownership situation than the Saints do. Like people kind of blast Gale as an owner, which I think is ridiculous, but like Woody Johnson is way worse as far as he's way more involved, way more meddling, and he's a much bigger clown. When you factor in these stories of him, like they're focusing on Madden ratings and his kids have a say in roster selection, like, trust me, it could be a whole lot worse. Woody Johnson is way worse than what's going on with the Saints.
Yeah, athletic. I think the Saints just kind of went up against someone with the candidate that was going to probably have very strong ties and strong feelings towards that organization. And you can definitely talk yourself into it being a better spot than the Saints because you got more cap space, a younger roster. But there are
better players, younger roster, New York. You get to pick your GM. Like when you put it all like that, it's like, yeah, of course he's going to take the Jets.
It comes with its own set of obvious drawbacks.
Sure.
But yeah, look, it's not a great spot to be in right now. They're going to have to try to figure out, who they're going to hire now, and I don't really know who it's going to be. I think Mike McCarthy goes to the top of the list. Your second choice there is well. It felt like Chicago was the first choice on that one, but that's okay. It doesn't really matter how you get your guy if you end up getting the right guy. They're going to get someone, but yeah, I'm not excited about anybody at this point, but I don't know that I was over. And look, like there was a million shows where I said I like the leadership, but I would rather have an offensive guy. Like, I don't know that I'm shattered over the idea of not getting Aaron Glenn. I think he was probably the best coach, and I think he was probably the guy you wanted over everybody else, just given the overall traits and then the lack of quality, I think, or lack of overwhelming resume from a lot of people. McCarthy, I separate from that a little bit because he's a very known commodity. But like, at that point we were talking about Mike Kafka and Anthony Weaver and Joe.
Kafka's not getting the job, guys. Come on.
Brady and Aaron Glenn out of that group. Like, I'm not sure that I'm blown away by any of them.
Yeah, and I think this needs to be said. like it's kind of like a Sudoku puzzle, and people forget. It blows my mind. Like in the comment section of videos, not just mine, but just other ones that I read or even Reddit, where you'll have the same person say, "I don't want Aaron Glenn because I don't want anything to do with anyone who's ever been in the Saints building," and that same person will be like, "I choose Joe Brady." It's like, well, Joe Brady, what are you talking about? His first job was with the Saints. Like, he was handpicked by Sean Payton, right? Like, what do you mean? But, then you'll have like, well, I don't want Rizzi. I just saw this comment. It was like, I don't want Rizzi. I want an offensive play caller. It's like, Rizzi has nothing to do with the offense. Like, Rizzi, if you want an offensive play caller, like, you need to focus on the offensive coordinator. You don't have to. Everyone's putting what they want in like these little buckets, but sometimes there's crossover. Like Rizzi, for example. It's like, I don't want Rizzi. I want a young offensive coordinator, or I want a young offensive mind. Well, you can have both. You can have Rizzi and Kubiak, and it gives you Rizzi as your head coach, and that gives you Kubiak as the young offensive mind. And this is gonna blow some people's minds, okay? And this is controversial yet brave, but what really is the difference between Joe Brady, resume-wise, between Joe Brady and Clint Kubiak? Like, Joe Brady was at LSU, okay, where, I mean, I'm pretty sure me, Mike, Nick, anybody in the comment section could have been he wasn't even calling plays at LSU, but he was just, the quarterback's coach at LSU? So he made that work, but I think that 2019 LSU's team probably could run itself. Then he goes to Carolina. Bit of a mystery, right? Completely falls apart at Carolina. Complete disaster. Was it because of Matt Rule? Was it because of COVID? Who knows? Total disaster there. Then he's in Buffalo, but he's behind Ken Dorsey. Dorsey leaves. Brady's the OC. But then there's Josh Allen. So it's like, again, yeah, Buffalo's sweet, but what happened? Like, what has Joe Brady done that shows that he could be a head coach? What has he done? And don't forget, guys, like, he's coming, if it's Joe Brady, okay, he's coming into a situation that is by far the worst roster he has had in his entire career. So you're not getting Joe Brady to go out there and light it up and score 40 points, 50 points, MVP candidate at quarterback, all this stuff. You're getting somebody who's going to rebuild a roster, who's going to build through the draft, who's going to develop young players, who's going to make a 3, 4, 5-year plan. Like, what has Joe Brady done exactly that makes you believe he could do that? It's a complete shot in the dark. Like, yeah, he's a hot shot name. Yeah, the Bills' offense is cool. Yeah, Josh Allen is cool. But when you really sit back and look at this and really sit back and think about what he has actually done in his career, what he has actually done on his resume, is a little unclear of why, why he's such a like pick for the Saints. Okay, so I know it's kind of a game of musical chairs with these candidates, and you hear the same 20 people say the Saints should hire blank person, the Saints should hire this blank person. But when it comes to like what the Saints are looking for, it's very unique. And you have to make sure that candidate can come in there and do the job. Like Kellen Moore, for example. I like Kellen Moore a lot. Kellen Moore is coming in here to do something very specific. And it's not just call plays. It's not just design 3rd and 5, passing plays they can pick up a first down. There's a lot more to this. There's a lot more to what the Saints need. They need someone that you can trust to build a culture, build an identity. What is Joe Brady's culture? What is Kellen Moore's culture? What is their team identity? How do they manage a roster? How do they manage a locker room? How do they look at prospects in college? How are they going to approach the draft? Those are questions that, as far as all of us, it's a complete question mark. We just have no idea. Now, I think it is up to the GM, it's up to the front office to interview those guys. They all deserve an interview, for sure. But during those 5, 6, 7, 8 hours of an interview process, I would think the front office can see pretty quick, like, this guy is way in over his head. This guy is not ready yet to be a coach. So there's a lot that goes into it.
McCarthy, I think, becomes like the adult in the room at this point, and we'll see from there. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I forgot what rant I was on right now, but like
I'm confused with thought because we had two different things that both us we didn't necessarily openly say it, but we discussed it. We've been discussing this for months now. Two things that could be a negative, Aaron Glenn. If the Saints somehow had their choice of every candidate, the two negatives were: is he too tied to the past? Do you want more of a clean break from the past? And he's a defensive guy, so he obviously would have to hire an offensive coordinator.
Yeah.
And so those are two reasons why you might not have picked him anyway. But you just wanted to have the option. You wanted it to be your choice,
Yes.
and not you got rejected by the guy for sure.
And he's the choice you're making from that group. Like no matter what, like he is the guy you're picking from that group. It's a loss for the team, but I'm not I'm not convinced that he's absolutely going to be the best coach out of this group. But
Yeah, I mean, again, like you got to remember, like who the hell knows? It's very similar to the draft where, it's like, well, you're drafting between Trey Lance and Zach Wilson. It's like, well, this positive, this negative. Well, you're missing on him, but you might be able to get him, and then they both suck. Who the hell knows? Like these guys, we're not sure any of these guys are going to be successful. We're not sure Glenn can do the job just as much as we're not sure about Brady, and we're not sure about Moore, and that's why the interview process happens. And when Peyton was hired, people weren't sure about Peyton. So there is no like you're missing on a guaranteed thing. We know just as much about Liam Cohen as we do about Ben Johnson, right? So we'll see.
he's the guy that I would wanted to have placed my bet on. Having said that, I wanted them to get an offensive coach the whole entire time. Like, and I still want them to get an offensive coach. And if you give me a preference, I'm still swinging my bat at one of these younger guys. I think Mike McCarthy's a leader in the clubhouse. I think he's the safe pick. I think if you're the Saints, that's probably where you should lay your money. But if you want to take the risk and go for the home run, like I'm still like more intrigued by the possibility of Joe Brady or Kellen Moore, even though I don't think that's what they end up doing. And that's kind of where I've been from the beginning. That's where I'm still at. And, I think McCarthy would be a fine choice for this team. And I kind of feel like that's the one that's going to play out. But, I would have been excited about the possibility of Aaron Glenn, even though I think defensive coaches are tough. And I think Liam Cohen's a great example of that. Like you put somebody in an OC role and they're good at it and you're getting poached right away.
Well, they had Dave Canales last year. He got poached. They have Liam Cohen. He almost got poached. Yeah.
Yeah. So
that's another thing too. I had a commenter ask me about this, but when you have that like CEO kind of or defensive coach, one of those two, like you do kind of run the risk of where you're constantly turning over your offensive coordinators. If you have success, they're gone, right? Like, I mean, just look at Tampa Bay. So, I mean, like they said, you go Canales, boom, you bring in Cohen, boom, he's gone. Like, well, he seems to be staying now, but he's being poached. And, so there is a benefit to going with an offensive head coach to where at least that can be stable. And defense is way more volatile. We've talked about that before, where the Dallas Cowboys can be the best defense of all time 2 years ago, and then the next year they could be 30th, right? The Browns 2 years ago, top 5 defense. This year, 30th. So defense is very volatile. Offense is much more consistent as long as the players are there. Obviously, injuries do change things, but that is a huge benefit to going with an offensive head coach, is that you can have a little more stability with your offense and your play calling and all that. Whereas if you go with the Dan Campbells of the world, you do run the risk of like, well, the CEO is here, but now the entire staff on both sides of the ball is gone. Literally, our identity, our culture, our play calling, everything is gone. And that's difficult. Like the Lions, I think, are going to have a really hard time next year because that is a crazy loss to lose your entire defensive staff, your entire offensive staff in the same offseason with players that seemingly are very dependent on that. I mean, we saw Philadelphia struggle after they lost Gannon and Steichen. So, and you could argue that Glenn and Johnson are better coordinators than Steichen and Gannon. So, maybe that does give credence to going after Brady or Moore. But like I said, you also you have, like, it's one thing for me to say we should go after Joe Brady. I don't know anything about Joe Brady. I know the Bills are sweet. I know LSU was sweet, but how much he's actually doing, like what he's up for, who he is as a person, what his roster design and what all that is, I have no clue. And if I spent 6, 7, 8 hours with this guy in an interview, maybe I'm looking at him like, this guy's not a coach. this guy's not a head coach. Like, this guy might be able to call plays, but and it's kind of the Pete Carmichael thing where, imagine during the Saints run where the Saints are the greatest offense of all time. Imagine being like, we want someone like Pete Carmichael to be the head coach. Offensive coordinator for the Saints for 5-6 years, learned under Sean Payton. But lo and behold, he ain't doing nothing. Like, lo and behold, yeah, he's the OC in title, but what does that really mean? What does it really mean? What are these guys actually doing? So it's one thing where as a fan and an analyst and all this stuff and a commentator, you got to position the pieces on the board, but it's really up to those interviews that we're not going to see. It's really up to the conversations that we're not going to have any details about or are privy to at all. And so I think we pretty much know who the candidates are. We pretty much know who it's going to be, one of those four. And at this point, I'm kind of cool with any of the four. Like, I know I've been very critical of Mike McCarthy, but God, this headset is killing me with this beanie. But if Mike McCarthy is the head coach, like, I would assume then, like, okay, he's going to have to figure out a staff. He's going to have to, and then the question is, okay, is he calling plays? Like, is he getting an OC? Is he going to, what exactly is he going to do? How exactly is he going to operate this thing? And then it's a whole other host of questions. But, at that point, it's like, okay, well, we do have, like, I guess the adult in the room. At least we do know he can be logistically a head coach. Like, do I think he'll be successful? Probably not. Not unless he's got a Dan Quinn type as a DC and Kellen Moore type as an OC, unless he's got some help. So, and then if you don't get him and you end up with either Moore or Brady, it's like, well, we're taking a swing. We're taking a home run shot on a young coordinator. Let's see how that works. And then if none of that works and we end up with Rizzi, well, that's not that bad either, right? Like, Rizzi just recently turned down Chicago, so he's not following Ben Johnson, thank God. Kind of interesting, when you look at that, and maybe he's holding out hope to be a head coach. I don't know, but then maybe, hopefully, if it is Rizzi, hopefully they keep Kubiak. So I'm kind of okay with where the Saints are right now. I'm kind of okay with where things are chilling. So I think, I've said this before, but I think the Saints are in a pretty good situation where they can kind of sit back, relax. They don't have to rush anything. No one's calling Mike McCarthy. Moore and Brady are in the middle of playing right now. Even Cliff Kingsbury's in the middle of playing right now. So you got to kind of wait until they're done anyways. So, I mean, for the Saints, it's one of those things where you just kind of sit back, let things play out, get your ducks in a row, and we'll see from there.
It's just you're constantly looking for that over and over and over. So, I would prefer that. We'll see where it goes from here. But yeah, definitely a loss for the organization today.
What's interesting is 5 of their remaining 7 candidates now are offensive minded. Three young guys, Mike McCarthy and Cliff Kingsbury. I don't know if we count him or not. They requested permission, and he hasn't done any interviews yet. Yeah. But 5 of the 7 potential candidates that have at least been reported, and the other 2 are Anthony Weaver and Darren Rizzi. So.
And I don't think Weaver's a legitimate candidate either. I don't think him or Kafka are legitimate candidates.
It feels like it's going to be offense unless it's Rizzi or Anthony Weaver. And from the public relations, can anyone end up feeling good about this? It's interesting. I don't know if Kellen Moore, Joe Brady, and Cliff Kingsbury are lesser candidates in the Saints' mind, or if we just feel that way because they can't schedule interviews with them.
I don't feel like they're lesser at all. Like, that's what I'm kind of saying. Like, people got all on this Glenn thing, and everyone was like, it's Aaron Glenn. Glenn's number one. It's got to be Glenn. But then when you take a step back, you're like, well, I mean, why is he number one? Because he was previously tied to the team. Like, what makes him so great? What makes him any better than Kellen Moore or Joe Brady, or like what? Like, what's the what makes him better than Liam Cohen? They're all kind of like, they all have their strengths and weaknesses. They all have their unknowns. So to me, it's just kind of like next man up. Like, it is what it is. Next man up. See who's ready to roll. I mean, you can go back. I go back and I think about all these candidates, all these coordinators that people were tossing around. Like, oh, you got to hire this guy. You got to hire. He's got next. Byron Leftwich or Eric Bieniemy, or I mean, even like defensively, you got like Lou Anarumo and like even Matt Nagy whenever he left KC for the first time. It's like, oh, these guys have next, no doubt about it. And they go somewhere else and they're a complete flop. Sometimes like in Bieniemy's case, Bieniemy left. Bieniemy was being talked about as a head coach. He leaves Kansas City to go be the OC in Washington to prove that he could do it outside of that system. He has failed spectacularly everywhere he's gone, whether it's college, whether it's the pros, whether it's, wherever, right? So you got a guy there who it's like people are talking about him being a head coach, and he can't even be a coordinator somewhere else. So it just goes to show you, like, you really don't know until these guys are in the building, until these guys are interviewing, until you really ask them these questions. So the coaching thing, it's such a talking point and it's so important, but the more, it's just like when you do a Sudoku puzzle. The more you do it, like if you're just constantly banging away at it and making mistakes and all kind of stuff, the more complicated it gets. Sometimes you got to like erase the entire board and just go one number by one number and just fill things out as they are. Like you just got to kind of clean the slate. And that's where I think the Saints coaching, the search is, where you just got to kind of clean the slate. Like people that are all upset and losing sleep over Aaron Glenn, like, I don't get it. Why? Why? People that are already building a statue of Joe Brady, why? What's going on here?
Two scheduled to come in this week. Glenn was scheduled to come in this week. Rizzi's already in town. He's going to probably get a second interview. The other guys can't yet. So if next week we hear, all right, Joe Brady's coming in Tuesday, Kellen Moore's coming in Wednesday, Cliff Kingsbury's coming in Thursday, do we feel like they're real candidates, or do we feel like they're not real candidates for different reasons?
Yeah, they're real candidates. What are we talking about? Remember when Matt Rule went to Carolina? It was like, this is a home run. This is the number one coaching prospect in the world right now. Like, this guy, everyone wants Matt Rule. Next thing you know, Matt Rule is run out of Carolina and struggling at Nebraska. Like Lincoln Riley. Lincoln Riley make him the head coach of the Cowboys. Now Lincoln Riley can't win 8 games at USC.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think we feel like AG's a top candidate because it just feels like AG was the top candidate the whole way through it. But yeah,
that kind of is the answer right there. It's like we thought AG was the top candidate because it felt like he was the top candidate. It's like, okay, well, there you go. That is kind of it. It's like, it's a lot of the same headlines and narratives being circulated, but
I would say it was probably more dot connecting for us than it was anybody's telling us, hey, AG's our top candidate. Like, I think they were trying to schedule everybody at the same time. I'm still not convinced that Mike McCarthy wasn't always I know for some people he wasn't, and then it kind of played out a little bit slow, but I think for some people in their 6-person panel, I think he was the top pick for some of them, and maybe not for some others, and the people that he isn't the top pick for, I think that's just because they don't know yet. They haven't talked to him. Like, they haven't interviewed him. They've never worked with them before, but some people have, and some people know him. But yeah, AG, I would guess though that AG, if they could have got it done yesterday, we'd be talking about.
I'd have waited for the other guys.
Yeah. I think AG probably was their top pick, even though like we weren't told, like he would have to be. Like, he just feels like the guy that checks the most boxes. The unfortunate thing is that he's a defensive coach. Like that's really the only.
Yeah, but once Johnson goes to Chicago and once it becomes a package deal, all of a sudden he doesn't check the boxes, right? All of a sudden there becomes a round peg in a square hole, where it's like, well, he's a package deal with Newmark, and we're not going to do that. So then he's not even a candidate.
Drawback there. But yeah, I got a lot to say about that defense, but like I'm not gonna say it because like it would just come off like fake, and
they'll have to have all those shows about. Should we be worried that the Detroit's defensive collapse means AG is going to be a bad coach? No, we can avoid the 2 weeks of that concept.
Well, the thing that, and mostly who he hires is his OC. Like the one thing, and I texted you this yesterday. Like there was a thing that said like he wants Kubiak, and I was like, oh my god, like this is really like just the second coming of what they just had.
And Ben Johnson wants Dennis Allen and Rizzi, right?
So yeah, I wouldn't want to say, like, it just feels like AG running the same defense, running the same offense. Like it would have been like, and then they probably would have kept Phil, like, or brought in Banjo or something like that. And
Aaron Glenn, great point. Like if Aaron Glenn comes in, like this whole like, well, fine, it's going to be totally different. It's going to be a whole shakeup and a change. Aaron Glenn coming in and keeping Kubiak would be thematically and aesthetically The exact same. It would be virtually the same defense Dennis Allen's rocking and rolling with. It would obviously be the same offense with Kubiak if he remained. So it's like aesthetically, the difference between Rizzi and Glenn is not much, depending on who Rizzi would hire as his DC. But that's kind of what I'm talking about, where you got to look at like, okay, like Aaron Glenn is a big name, Ben Johnson is a big name, like Kellen Moore is a big name. Like these are all names, they're all like characters. But what does it mean? What does it actually mean on the field? What's it going to look like? How's it going to actually translate onto the field? And like they just said, that Aaron Glenn being hired would not have really changed much. And that's like at the very beginning of the video, and I'm saying like you got people who are saying we got to tear this thing down. We need a whole new identity, whole new this, whole new that. We got to need brand new. We need Aaron Glenn. And it's like, well, that's actually the most similar possible outcome to what you've had. So
it would have just felt like you're doing the same thing all the way over again. So I think for people that want something different, like there's a chance here where it feels like you're going to get something different, even if there are some like Hazlitt ties or or Randy Mueller ties or whatever it is. It does feel like this at least sets you up to go on that pretty new path, unless all roads lead back to Rizzi, who I think would have to staff out with different people. So I think you're getting something different there too.
Yeah, look,
I think the biggest possible change, I think, would be Kellen Moore. Maybe Joe Brady. Kellen Moore, because it's just like brand spanking new offense, obviously a brand spanking new defense, whole new staff, whole new, like everything's new. Brady, I guess, is similar. But yeah, I'm like Rizzi, depending on what happens with Kubiak, like, yeah, if Rizzi is the coach, Rizzi will have to completely rebuild the staff. So would he try and get someone similar to Kubiak? Would he try and get someone for the Shanahan tree? Would what would he want to do defensively? Do you want someone similar to what you've done? Do you want someone that does something totally different? Like how's it all shake out? So there are some major dominoes that fall with all of the candidates. Same with McCarthy. Like if McCarthy gets hired, is it going to be Mike McCarthy, the CEO, like he was in Dallas? Or is it going to be Mike McCarthy, the play caller, play designer, like he was in Green Bay? And I have no clue what we're going to get. If you told me, and I said this 2 weeks ago, if you told me we got the Mike McCarthy CEO and we kept Clint Kubiak as the OC and he went and got some DC, I'm fine with that. If we got the play design, play calling Mike McCarthy, okay, I got a lot of questions because he hasn't really done that successfully in 7 years. So there's a lot of nuance to the coaching search, and it's not like Ben Johnson fits every single team. It's not like Aaron Glenn fits every single team. You got to like it's a real mix and match kind of game.
Look, I was about to make another point, but I think it transitions into the next topic. So I'll let you introduce the next topic, and then I'm going to continue about how this could turn out in the Saints' favor.
All right, there you go, ladies and gentlemen. And my last point, just like Mike said, I think this will turn out in the Saints' favor because the Saints can relax now. They can step back. They can sit back. They can chill. The teams the fact that we have Rizzi right now is a huge security blanket. Some of these teams are looking around like, what the hell are we going to do? Like, think about if you're Jacksonville right now. If you're Jacksonville, you just fired your GM. You're basically going all in, hoping that Liam Cohen calls you back. You're basically the stalker ex-girlfriend with Liam Cohen now. But if you whiff on Liam Cohen, what the hell are you going to do if you're Jacksonville? You got to find a GM. You got to find a coach. You got to get staffs going. Like, Panic City, all right? Panic City population. Dallas is about to hire Brian Schottenheimer. What? Like, you talk about panic. They went from, no one's talking about Dallas. Dallas had the rumors about Dion or whatever, and now all of a sudden it's like, yeah, they're just going to hire Schottenheimer. Think about this, ladies and gentlemen. Brian Schottenheimer was the OC for Dallas, right? Didn't call plays. This is when McCarthy took back play calling after Moore left. So Schottenheimer was the OC title alone, and now he's going to be the head coach. My guy hasn't done anything yet. So he'll be the head coach and the first-time play caller. Oh, man. Like, Dallas, what happened? You talk about America's team, more like America's nightmare. That is absolutely brutal, man. So the Saints are actually, guys, not in a bad situation. I know it seems like desperate or whatever, and a lot of people are freaking out about this, but we're in an okay spot. The Saints are in a much better spot than Jacksonville. They're in a much better spot than Dallas right now. So we'll see how this plays out, but we're going to be covering it every single day, and we're going to be doing it better than anybody else, I'll tell you that much. So thank you very much for watching. I will see you in the next video.